Swords are much thicker, more robust than kitchen knives because for fighting against other people, kitchen knives are for cutting food, right? One of the main details of how a Japanese sword looks is the hamon. That is something definitely we're going to incorporate and keep on the Sujihiki because it is such a striking detail from the Japanese sword. I feel it has to be incorporated into the Sujihiki. The reason why we want to make the Sujihiki, the grinding and the shaping, not like a sword is because it's a Sujihiki. It's a kitchen knife. It needs to function as a kitchen knife. It is a challenge to combine the sword and the kitchen knife together. I think the challenge for me is getting it in the end to have a feeling that you're looking at a sword, but it's also a kitchen knife. That's the challenge. I really wanted to have a feeling of a short sword. So I think that's kind of challenging, and that'll really come out in the end, I think, when we do the final polishing. This is a sword, a Wakizashi, made by the same blacksmith that made the Sujihiki, Tatsuto Yamano. I'm looking at the sword before I actually start work on the Sujihiki because I just want to see what type of details that are on something similar in length and size to the Sujihiki, and kind of see the details that are on the sword that I want to incorporate into the Sujihiki. So it's nice to get a nice overview of the sword before I start to do any work on it, any sharpening, that is.
How is the Wakizashi?
Oh, the Wakizashi is really beautiful. It's really, really beautiful shape. The hamon is really beautiful. The hadori work, the polish, is really, really nice on this one. The Wakizashi's shape is, of course, very, very different from Sujihiki, or swords are very different from kitchen knives. There's a few main, very obvious differences. How thick it is on the spine is very, very different. And also there's not too much of a taper, meaning that it doesn't taper very much from here, the habaki, all the way along to the tip. The real taper really comes only from about here, where kitchen knives tend to have a really subtle, slow taper all the way to the tip. The other big thing is that, and for good reason, swords are much thicker, more robust than kitchen knives. So the cutting edge, starting from here to the edge, is a lot more stronger hamaguri, or more rounded convex shape, because it's for cutting flesh and bone. Kitchen knives are for cutting food, right? The design of the sword is really designed for what it's meant for. So much thicker, heavier spine for fighting against other people. It needs to take a lot of impact, so the spine has to be thicker. There's got to be more weight behind each cut. Also, the way the blade is shaped, almost like a hunting knife, it needs to actually be able to take a hit and not crack or crumble or break when it takes an impact during fighting. So it's a very, very different design and construction than a kitchen knife. Again, it's a really beautiful design, perfectly suited for what it's meant for. You can see the choji in here. It looks really cool. One of the main, you could almost say, iconic details of how a Japanese sword looks is the hamon. So this area running along here. That is something definitely we're going to incorporate and keep on the Sujihiki, because it is such a striking detail from the Japanese sword. So it's got to be, I feel it has to be incorporated into the Sujihiki, but in a very more classical style. So that's why the way I'll do the hamon will be very much more similar to actually how this hamon flows. So this is a gyuto. I don't have any Sujihiki today, but the idea of the grind is very similar to how I would actually shape the body of the Sujihiki. The difference between the sword that we were looking at before, the Wakizashi, and the kitchen knife, or Sujihiki, the sword, of course, as we saw, is very thick at the spine, where the Sujihiki, or most kitchen knives, tend to taper quite a bit from around the machi area, or all the way through to the tip. Another big reason that we saw is that the thickness of the blade is so much thinner because of what it's used for cutting vegetables, for cutting protein, for kitchen use rather than battle. Typical Sujihikis tend to be around 270 to 300 millimeters long, can be a little bit longer, but some are very similar to a long petty. Sometimes that can be too thin, but there's a lot of variation of Sujihiki, but they tend to be not, of course, as wide as a gyuto, tend to be almost like the heel height of a petty, maybe a little bit wider, but around from the spine till about here. So the thickness is about 30 to 40 millimeters around there, sometimes 45. The reason why we want to make the Sujihiki, the grinding and the shaping, not like a sword is because it's a Sujihiki. It's a kitchen knife. It needs to function as a kitchen knife. If we shaped, like we saw before, like a Wakizashi, for example, it'd be way too thick, and cutting and slicing meat for what the Sujihiki is used for, it just wouldn't perform well. So we want to keep it as a kitchen knife in its function, not like a sword for battle. The book I'm looking at is called the CONNOISSEUR'S Book of Japanese Swords. It's got pretty much everything you need to know about Japanese swords in there. And a lot of really unique and interesting details that are difficult to find in other books. Yeah, I found the type of spine that I want to use for the Yamano Sujihiki. So that's a two-sided spine. This one right here. There's quite a few different types of spines, and from each spine there's different shapes of each spine. So I mean, here there's 4, but then you can see it. Those can also be on different angles and different shapes, widths, thicknesses. The main reason I want to make double-sided is that's what Yamano put on the sword. So I'd like to stick with what he did, and looking at the Wakizashi, it's a really nice detail. I think it's important to keep that on Sujihiki. This is the Sujihiki that Yamano made. This is what I want to keep, the two-sided spine. And this is what Yamano put onto this blade. I think this shape is a pretty popular shape. It tends to be on many swords. So I think this is what he wanted to put on for this Sujihiki, what he thought was right for this shape, for this blade. I'm going to keep this shape and work with this shape on the spine of the Sujihiki. The other details that need to match the spine is the choil area here. Typically on most kitchen knives, this area is rounded, or actually sometimes not even touched at all. Just cut actually the way it is like this, or if it's korochi, it's just left very raw. Nowadays you can find many different shapes of choil on kitchen knives, but typically most of the time they're actually just round or are just left the way they are. On this Sujihiki, what I want to do is I want to match the spine to the choil area. So choil area will also be double-sided or an A-frame or roof style to match the spine. I think that'll look nice. The reason why I chose to do that is that if the choil area is rounded and the spine is an A shape or triangle, two-sided, for me personally, you lose the balance on the blade. When the spine is matching the choil area, for me, it just looks overall balanced well. So that's why I really want to keep the balance of the entire blade overall. There's some parts of the Sujihiki that we want to keep from the sword, the spine, and also the choil shape. Of course, swords don't have a choil, but we want to keep the shape of the spine and put that onto the choil area. Everything else about the blade is going to be Sujihiki because it's a kitchen knife. It needs to perform as a kitchen knife. So the grinding, the shape, how thin it is, the taper from the machi area all the way to the tip. One really big important part of a Sujihiki is the grinding in this area and how it tapers. And that's going to be the main, that'll be a lot of the work that I need to do, is actually the shaping of this whole area here. One of the reasons why I'm looking and really thinking about all this geometry and kind of planning out how it's going to look, all the angles, the shapes, is because I don't want to go into sharpening without a plan. I really want to plan it out so that at 200, everything is set. For me, after 200, it's just a process of moving towards polishing. And after you get past 200 into 400, 800, 1000, it's very difficult to make major changes. So getting it set at 200, for me, is very, very important. It is a challenge to combine the sword and the kitchen knife together. I think the challenge for me is getting it in the end to have a feeling that you're looking at a sword, but it's also a kitchen knife. That's the challenge. So of course I can just approach it however I want, really loose, and do the hamon the way I want, do the shape the way I want, but I really want to have a feeling of a short sword. So I think that's kind of challenging, and that'll really come out in the end, I think, when we do the final polishing of the hamon and all the details come together. What we're going to be doing next, moving forward, is working on the 200 stone to set everything. That's going to be the very first thing we do. Probably one of the most time-consuming as well. As I get into the rough sharpening of 200 and start moving towards polishing, I'll start thinking more about the hamon, how I want the hamon to look, the flow of the hamon, And then as we get closer to maybe Uchigamori, the final polishing stages, we should now then start to see details that are in the hada, or the kind of skin, or the steel, the iron of the details in the iron and the steel. So then we can start to imagine, okay, we need to use this technique or this technique to bring out, or to make the hada balance with the hamon. So I'll probably go over it a little bit more today, and then start working on it a little later on today after I just check a few more things. I just have to go back to check the straightness again and some other details, thickness and width, and then we'll start work on the 200 grit stone. Yeah, actually I'm very excited. When I first saw the photos Yamano sent of this blade after it was, I guess, just quenched actually, after yakire, and we could see the hamon because he did a quick etch which brings out the hamon shape, right? I was really excited at that time. I thought, wow, that's going to be a lot of fun to work on. Fun project. And kind of a, dream of mine to do something like this, so it's going to be lots of fun. So I think it's time to start working on this blade and get it finished so we can actually see how it actually looks. Here, this area is most